right, guys. Welcome to Starlite Pulpcast. I think this is number 17, if I'm not mistaken. And today we've got author Frank Bill with us, and he has a brand new book out called "Back to the Dirt." And I'm talking brand new. I mean, out just a few days ago. And this book is kind of covers one individual, right? Miles Knox, a Vietnam vet, but really it's a story not only about dealing with the repercussions of war, but also moving forward, retribution, a whole bunch tied in there. So, Frank, how you doing today, man?
Pretty good. How are you? Thanks
I'm
for having
good.
me.
I'm good. So, so this one of the things that's interesting, and Peter Ferris brought this up last week too, is when he was talking about The Devil Himself, which is his most recent U.S. book. He said that it took the better part of a decade, right, between idea generation all the way to publication. And with this book, Back to the Dirt, it sounds like that's pretty similar. It sounds like you started the ideas with it quite a bit ago, right? The generation.
Yeah, actually, after I'd finished writing Donnybrook, I started writing this and The Savage at the same time. And with the way my brain works, I can only focus on something for so long, and it jumps back to something else, which is probably why Donnybrook's written the way it is with the multiple characters. Because I
Mm-hmm.
get bored with something, I got to. But I was switching. I did 100 pages of The Savage rough pages, and 100 pages of Back to the Dirt rough pages. Sent those to my agent, and we did a proposal and sold it that way. And then I finished both the books around, gosh, I guess it was in 2013. I'm trying to remember. It's been so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So between 2011 and 2013, yeah, I wrote two, but that's kind of how I write everything. I've always got,
Okay.
you're a writer,
Okay.
you end up
Yeah.
getting
So
multiple
you.
things going on your laptop at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Lots
Okay.
of folders.
And so what, right, totally. And so while Miles Knox he's a unique character, right, into himself, obviously there are some biographical similarities, right?
Yeah, it's probably. I mean, all my books are really personal because I always pull from what I know, research what little bit I don't know. But yeah, Miles Knox is based basically on my time in the factory, some of the things I've went through in the factory, stories I've heard in the factory, from everything else that went on between crazy interactions, an explosion I was involved in when I first went to the factory. It was really nasty, really dirty. Get seniority and work your way up and get out of the dirtier jobs. But
Mhm.
this was like my encounter in the factory was like my first even foray into like racism, like real full blown racism, not just between whites and blacks, but just between blacks. I just never heard each other the way they would talk to each other. I'm kind of like, dude, what the heck am I? Because growing up, which I kind of mentioned this in the book with the characters, is that growing up, my parents had friends of all different colors and
Mhm.
backgrounds and identities, just gay, straight, whatever, but they were never identified as that. My parents never done anything like that. Just like Joe's coming over, Steph's coming over, and
Right.
they used to go out on Friday and Saturday nights and go check out the bands. There was always local bands playing, and then go drink, play cards, and listen to music. And when I went to a factory, it's like a culture shock. I was like, holy crap. People talk. I mean, this is like, I've never seen anything like it. And then the guys I work with now, we always all talk about that. Like when we first come, it's like, holy shit, what did we get into? There's people in here having prayers. There's like people doing drugs, drinking. It's not like that anymore, but this is back in early 90s, I think, when I
Uh,
first started there. Then the other part of the character is my dad serving in Vietnam, and
yeah.
what Miles has to deal with is it's basically, I had somebody ask me to sum the book up, and I'm like, it's pretty much a blue collar working class book. Most of my stuff is, but this is probably the most blue collar working class thing I've written about it. It's about what you carry, because when you go into war and you come out, you're a completely different person, and you never
Of
lose the
course.
things that you've seen and what you've done, and it's how you deal with the aftermath. Some people don't deal with it real well.
Mhm.
People like my grandfather who served in World War II never talked about till they were older. If you bought it, he's one of those guys. If you bought him something for Christmas, it better be made in the USA, because the first thing you do if it was clothes, he looks at the tag and throw it back at you.
Gotcha.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's things you can't change. That's just the way that it was ingrained in him. The things he's seen, what
Absolutely.
he done. My dad's
Absolutely.
not like that now, but
Yeah.
but that was the biggest takeaway when I finished the book. Because when I write, I don't think about a theme. I never think.
Mhm.
I've had people ask me, like, well, do you try to write for other people, to fit into what's maybe the hottest topic or what's selling? I'm like, no, I write for myself. And
Yeah.
there's like-minded people like me, and that's who's going to read the book.
Right.
If there's only 5 of them, so be it. There's only 5 of them. I can't
Yeah.
help that. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Rick Rubin, the music producer, always says the only person you ever make anything for is yourself. And he
yep.
said that the moment you try to make something for someone else, it's going to go
Yep.
off the rails like crazy.
That's why there's so much good music that came from him. I mean, you look at Slayer. I
Yeah.
mean, Public
Yeah.
Enemy. I mean, come on. There was nobody
Yeah.
else at the time when those bands come out. You know,
Beastie Boys, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Red
Yeah,
Hot
it's
Chili Peppers.
crazy.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's different arrays, different types of music from every
Yeah.
type of background. You
Oh,
know,
Johnny
changed
Cash. Yeah.
culture completely. You know.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that it's interesting that you bring that up because the you said that you don't have any themes, and I fully believe you on that. Because I don't think of them that way either. But
Yeah.
it seems to me like this book has a lot to do with um, loss and retribution, and it's interesting because, like you said, when somebody goes to war and they come back, it affects them so deeply, and oftentimes they don't want to talk about it. But it's also just how war affects because I know in my family, my uncle was lost in Vietnam. He was killed in Vietnam, and it affected. That was my mom's side of the family. It affected that family for decades. I mean, just shattered branches in that family for a long time. And, that's somebody who didn't make it back. And then somebody who did make it back, like your dad, it affected him too for decades and decades.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that kind of thing that you put into this it's hard to nail. It's hard to write about, and it's hard to get right. So how did you go about writing about his experiences?
Basically, sat down with him over one of it was probably just like one long period for like 2 or 3 hours. And at the time we didn't have tape recording or anything. I wrote everything down by hand,
Mm-hmm.
and and then just little tidbits of stories and things I would get from him along the line. But I got the grain of it I got written down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but because of everything else that happened, because I wanted to go back and write about Operation Allenbrook, which was one of the major battles he was in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I didn't get to. So that's where the second part of the novel came in for research on a special forces unit called Tiger Force, which is
Saw
based
that.
off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, read the book. It's an awesome book. It's a horrifying book, but it's like a detective novel because the two journalists that went back to research what had happened, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like it's like The Wire or something. They go back and just trace the lines of the soldiers from the time period that they were in, how that unit started, and what all the atrocities they done, and then it traces them to find them who's still alive today, or
Mm-hmm.
not today, but whenever they write, publish the book or whatever.
Right.
Um, they find those who are still alive and their lives are just completely wiped out. They're either on drugs, they're drunks, they abuse people because they're having to live with what they've done. They basically
Yeah.
went in because of the war. No, of winning the war, they felt like the government's like it's a war of numbers. So the special forces units decided to just go in and start wiping out villages of innocent people on top of the people who weren't innocent. So they just killed everybody,
Right.
and then they had to live with the aftermath of that. And that's where they were collecting uh, ears, scalps, noses. Dudes making necklaces. I mean, all that stuff is real. It's a lot. If I remember correctly, that's one of the things that Apocalypse Now actually came from was those stories before the book was ever written.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and funny enough, I mean that's familiar. I know I bring it up all the time, but that's familiar with Blood Meridian too, where
mhm.
it I mean obviously they're scalp hunters, but in that they get to the point where they're like, at this point after they've been doing it for months, it's like, well, we were taking Apache and Indian scalps, but what's the difference now between a Mexican scalp and an Indian scalp?
Yep.
Right, in the
Yep.
next town they won't know that it's still black hair. So it becomes this thing of they just start slaughtering everybody as opposed to
Yep.
what they were actually there for. Same concept, right?
Yep. And
Yeah.
then my thing was that Miles was part of the unit that would hunt down another American unit that was doing the damage because he's
Ah,
like pulling damage control because they don't want this to get out to a reporter in the U.S. and let it get on the news that hey,
oh sure.
you've got the special forces unit killing innocent people, but it's kind of like they've
Yeah.
become cannibals and everything else. So yeah, yeah. This is by far the most personal thing I've written because of every aspect of it. The even not to get too deep in the weeds, like the opening scene comes from a guy I used to work with who got fired and came back. He started long before me, but he was just kind of, you probably heard this. He was kind of a rough around the edges character. He was really gruff. But when he originally worked there, there was a guy that kept borrowing money from him on nights for lunch, and then the guy never would pay him back. He's like,
Mhm.
"I'll get you the next day, or I'll get you the next day." And the dude's like, finally, he's like, "No, you're going to pay me now." And he beat the shit out of the guy up, threw him in his vehicle, and drove him to an ATM and made him take the money out and pay him back. I never
There you
forget when
go.
he told that story. I'm like, that's going to fit somewhere along the line whenever
Right, right.
So that kind of became the opening, only it was steroids. So,
Yeah.
but then the explosion, Pi was a real person. I never got to work with him, but I always seen him. Uh, I remember how the story went. Pi either played college basketball or could have, and he chose to work in the factory instead. He pretty much died not long after he retired. I'd see that guy. This guy's about 7 foot tall, just come out dirtier than shit every day. Works
Hmm.
on day one, just working his ass off.
Right.
But, and then some of the different foremans and stuff I dealt with over the years, some of the guys that work for it are like, holy shit, you wrote about these people? It's like, I know exactly who you're talking about. I'm like, well,
Right.
it's the realism of the story, it adds that other depth, hopefully people can relate to it better that way. Or I always think you
Absolutely.
can if you're writing about something that's real,
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's this is one of the things I had on the list to talk about. So I'm gonna push it up. And one of the things that we're told as writers forever, right? Is from the time you first start out, is people always say, write what you know,
Yeah.
right? There's certain like cliches, write what you know, show don't tell, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And uh and so and you have chosen very much to write about things that you know,
Oh yeah.
you know.
Everything.
uh yeah, yeah, no, exactly, yeah. And so because even in the new review that we have coming out, you have a story, and that involves a factory worker as well.
Yep. Yep.
um and some of the things she has to do to kind of get by, right? So
Yeah, because that was another thing. I grew up with my mom working in factories, and then she actually worked at the factory I work at now. She works down the street, but when I first started, I'd work overtime and I work with all these females that were always single, trying to raise their kid like my mom tried to raise me and my parent. When her and my dad got divorced, and just they'd work 6 days a week. They'd work their regular 48-hour week, and then they'd come in for 2 days of overtime and have one day to themselves. And that's I always work with them on their last night when I'm working my overtime. And they would, all they're going to do is go out for one night to maybe go out and drink, hang out with their friends, and then come back and get their kids through school or whatever it is they've got to do and taking care of their house. They're saving money for a house. I mean, they make good money, but they're single, and a lot of them have 2 or 3 kids, and
yeah, yeah,
or some have lost a significant other, which is a lot with like what's going on in the story.
right,
It's sad, but it's real. It's something you can really sink your teeth into because it's part of life. It's always, not to get like in a political thing, but people have always like will ask me like, is that what really goes on in the Midwest? I'm like, look, what goes on in New York or Los Angeles and what you guys want is not necessarily the same thing that somebody else in Idaho or Kansas or Indiana wants. We're all
sure,
living in a different time, and we all have different
absolutely,
wants and needs. It's different. It doesn't mean that we're against each other or we're being polarized or anything. It's just that you're in different circumstances, and it's hard for people to understand that.
absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that again, I don't want to get on a political thing, but it's that's what a lot of, I think, people don't understand, is that the
Oh, they
average
don't.
everyday life for somebody in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Atlanta, New York is drastically different than somebody living in a rural community in, Arkansas,
Yep.
Idaho, North Dakota, Washington. And
Yep.
so the and yet we have to find laws and everything else that govern
Right.
everybody, and
Yep.
that's what makes it difficult, because the desires, like you said, are just completely different. I mean,
Yeah, your wants and needs are completely different.
yeah,
Doesn't mean they're good or bad, because you
right,
still got to
right,
deal with the politics of people that you're spending your tax dollars on and aren't doing anything for you. But that's another story.
exactly, yeah,
Which,
oh, absolutely, yeah,
but that's a lot. Some of the stuff they talk about in the books. In the book, some people was like, I really like the politics because it's kind of like this middle of a road thing. It's not like you're right and I'm wrong. It's just what they're having to deal with. When we were doing editing, one of my editors is like, is this really what people talk about in the factory? I'm like, dude, when you're on break or you're working with the guys, here's what you do. You're bitching about the taxes you pay. You're bitching about your rights, how expensive everything is, and you talk about college basketball. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And other than that, they're happy, but they're just going to complain about it, because most of
Yeah.
the guys that work around or they have some kind of outside interest, whether it be, a lot of them are hunters, fishermen, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. They
Yeah.
like to make their money, pay their taxes, and just be left the hell alone. That's all they want to do.
Pretty
You know,
much.
as
Yeah.
long as they're not out, infringing upon somebody else or not committing a crime, they don't want to be bothered, which I'm kind of that way. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. So am I.
I mean,
Yeah.
if somebody needs help, I'll try to lend them a helping hand,
Mhm.
if they really need it, that kind of thing. But yeah, that's what I tried to explain to them. So the politics that you see in a factory it's on both sides, and everybody
Mhm.
just kind of bitches about it and tries to find a neutral ground where they always agree, which they try to do. And then
Sure.
9 times out of 10 they do, or they be able to work together.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think's been a lot of fun in both film and books for a couple of decades now has been that for the longest time, noir was looked at in this tiny through this tiny lens, right? Which was it was France, it was Los Angeles, it was New York, it was San Francisco, it was city life, fedoras, top coats,
Yep.
and a lot of steam somehow, right? And yet in the 90, I guess maybe back to the 80s, but certainly 90s and since, um rural noir really became big. And what's important and what people have realized, I think, is that you don't, yes, the fedora and the trench coat are really cool, don't get me wrong, but everybody's lives are connected through noir because people in noir are just normal folks
Yep.
making, I don't even want to say making shitty decisions. It's having shitty decisions,
Yep.
you know? And that's the same in a factory in Toledo,
You're trying to
just
make
like
the
it is.
best out of a shitty situation,
That's it.
basically.
Yeah,
That
that's
and
it. And it doesn't
sometimes
matter
you
where you are.
can't.
That's life.
Sometimes you can't.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the nice parts about it. But getting back to the write what you know thing, the interesting part about that, and we kind of touched on this before we came on, but they always tell you write what you know, but what that really means, I think, is when you're a young writer, go live.
Yep.
Right? Because
Yeah.
because
Down
you
do
can't
stuff.
write about what you know if you don't know shit.
Yeah. Well, that was a thing, growing up, because my cousins and I grew up on our grandparents' farm. We thought everybody
Mhm.
lived that way. And we
Sure.
would go to school and talk about stuff. And it's like, we don't get out and hunt and fish and build fires in the woods and go egging and corn and cars and all, just all the
Hmm.
crazy stuff that we do. It's kind of like we thought everybody had done that stuff. We didn't know. I mean, it was a completely different world. And as we got older and we got into drinking and sneaking booze onto the farm, we stayed at our grandparents' house, or smoking weed or doing acid or whatever it was.
Hmm.
As we, I want to say mature, but as we got older, we definitely weren't maturing. But you end up creating this like encyclopedia to draw from as you get older.
Sure.
And as you grow up, you kind of try to get away from all the crazy stuff that you've done. But
Yeah.
yeah, you basically got
Yeah.
out and lived, and you did. Other people don't do it till they go to college. That's whenever they blossom.
Right. Right. And so I think that a lot of young writers get frustrated with that because they hear write what you know and they think to themselves, well, then science fiction would never get written. And because you're not going on a spaceship. That's really not the way to think about it. It's more
No,
like,
because those science fiction authors are basically pulling from their own lives and making the fantastical things around what they know, and what they don't know, they can just kind of create something that's made up, but it's
sure,
based off of what they know.
exactly. It's
I mean,
exactly.
Philip K. Dick is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
way ahead of his time, writing Blade
Way ahead
Runner.
of this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's good. It was Hemingway that said, if you want to write, go live.
Yep.
That was one of his quotes. And that, I'm not a huge Hemingway guy, but he has some pretty good quotes out there. That's one of them. um, so talk to me about you're a son of a Marine, factory worker, still a factory worker. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I still work in the factory. Yeah, I get 3 and 4 days off. I work like 4 days one week, 12-hour days, and get 3 days off, and then I work 3 days and then get 4 days off. So yeah,
And
it's
so, do
and
the
then
people you work with in the factory, do they treat you any different? Do they look at you any different? Anything like that? Because
well, when the movie came out, I was called Hollywood, and I was like, I'm not Hollywood. There's like, there's Hollywood, and I'm like, no, I'm not Hollywood. No, but yeah, they all read my books. They're very supportive. Yeah,
Oh, good.
yeah, they ask questions, and they've pretty much have read everything I've written. So yeah. And like
That's
we were talking earlier, with the new one, they're like, "Holy shit, I can't believe you wrote about this."
uh-huh.
They can pinpoint who people are and situations
Yeah,
and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the funny things about being a writer is when somebody who you don't think of as being literary, you know, asks you a question about your own work, and you kind of go, "Whoa." Like they read the not only did they read the book, but they thought about it. Okay,
Oh, they know right away, especially from working there because I wrote about the dirt plant that we used to work in. It disappeared about 5 years ago because of the liquid portion of where we work with the polymers and the urethanes. That was always been the future of the business, and as it took off, the other part of the business wasn't losing money. That was the thing. It was more to do with a couple of union guys that were kind of mouthy, and the company that ended up buying us out was kind of like, we need to separate from that to kind of quiet this guy down. And there was a big lawsuit with him anyway, and they got rid of him, and they settled a lawsuit that he basically just can't ever come back after he took the money they offered him. But that's part of working with the union and the company. I have nothing against unions. Uh, the company we have, I feel like, has probably been the most fair of all the companies we've ever worked for. As
Okay.
far as kindness and being really down to earth, it's been a lot easier to deal with and talk to on a human level. I mean, the company that owned us before this was, man, they were horrible, but you pretty much needed a union with them because it was just they talked down to you and everything else. It was just
Right,
kind of
right.
ridiculous. But these guys are really cool. So
Yeah. Hmm. So talk to me about like I said, becoming a writer, the apprenticeship period. Let me put it like this: how did you decide to become a writer, to start writing, because of all the failure involved and the amount of time that it takes? How did because a lot of people, like you mentioned, you didn't go to college. A lot of people in college will start up, and sometimes you'll start taking classes just because you have to fill your class load, and all of a sudden you'll realize, I kind of like this writing thing, and then you kind of go from there. You obviously didn't have that same experience. So how did you start to go, okay, I'm going to become a writer?
uh, pretty much the same way, which I didn't learn till later, is pretty much like Larry Brown or Chuck Palahniuk kind of did. Which Chuck Palahniuk had a movie called Fight Club,
Mm-hmm.
which at the time I didn't know was based on a book. My wife and I go see it in like 1999, 2000. See, it's based on a book. Try to go out and buy the book. Well, it's a movie, so dumbass, you're not going to find the book anywhere. But I found his other. So I've never been a big fiction guy. I always read a lot of nonfiction and comic
Uh-huh.
books growing up. I always read about serial murders for whatever reason. It was always interesting to me until they went to court. Then it's like all the mayhem was done, and
Right, right.
they're going to jail.
Uh,
And
just just
anyway,
real quick, Frank.
yep,
Me too, because when I was a kid, I was just John Wayne Gacy, Zodiac Killer, Ted
yep,
Bundy. It was like,
yep,
I was just
yep, yep. Ed Gein, he's from Wisconsin. He was out in the Midwest. It was like holy shit. And then Slayer did a song about him, Dead Skin Mask, and
yeah.
anyway,
I actually grew up. I was in LA. I grew up in LA, and I was there during the Richard Ramirez year.
yeah, yeah.
I was like, I'm going off memory, so I'm gonna guess I was somewhere in the 12 to 14 range,
Okay.
So I was that early teen, and I actually slept with a baseball bat under my bed during that time, because that was gonna help when I was 12. And but I mean that was like a real thing. I mean, we were
Oh
watching
yeah.
in real time as this stuff was happening on the news. It seemed like on a weekly basis. So I mean, but yeah, I was. Anyways, go back to your point. But I was
I
all
remember all that. I wrote about that when I was in high school. That's when all the devil worshiping, the Satan star in his hand and everything.
yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, I didn't know that he's actually the second one. The original one is in the book that gosh, she passed away. She wrote a crime book, a true crime book about the guy who's the night stalker going through the windows there. There's a
Uh-huh.
people Tom, and then start breaking into the homes. Gosh, she was married to Patton Oswald. It's a great book.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
a
she
really good
she
book.
did pass away just recently. Yeah, yeah.
Her she had a heart issue that nobody knew about or something. For exactly what it was. Good book though. You should definitely check it out. Definitely worth reading. But
Right. But anyway, you were talking about how you read mostly nonfiction,
yeah.
and yeah.
And then I started buying Chuck Palahniuk's books, and he was writing in what was called a minimalist style. So I
Mhm.
started looking at minimalist authors and come across Raymond Carver and Larry Brown. When I got Larry Brown, started reading him, Facing the Music, Big Bad Love. I was like, okay, this guy's writing about Oxford, Mississippi, Tupelo, all that.
Exactly.
But it sounds a lot like Southern Indiana in the way that was raised,
Hmm.
being around
Hmm.
vets and factory workers and people who smoked a lot of cigarettes, drank a lot of booze, and were just kind of down on their luck.
Yep.
Um, and so then I ended up kind of reading everything that he had up to that time, which was like I think he was up in Joe, Father and Son, and Faye.
Uh-huh.
I don't, yeah, Rabbit Factory, none of that was out yet. And of course, Miracle Catfish was his last kind of unfinished book. But read him and was really, oh well, his first actual novel, Dirty Work, which is based about our Marine.
Uh-huh.
And then he has some books of essays and nonfiction I read, On Fire and Billy Ray's Farm. But it was one of those things that just clicked because it reminded me too much of how I was raised.
Sure.
Then I started reading guys like William Gay, Tom Franklin, uh, gosh, Daniel Woodrell. I didn't really start reading until I got my Landed an Agent.
Uh-huh.
But that's long ways down the road. And then Court McCarthy,
I like
uh,
I like
Harry,
Woodwell a lot.
Harry, yeah, Harry Cruz, that was one of
Hmm.
those guys
Of
that
course.
I got into. And then James Carlos Blake,
Hmm.
who I actually like more than I do McCarthy. I
Okay.
love James Carlos Blake. He's definitely one of those guys that more people need to read. Um,
Mhm.
just awesome. But
Well, you know what's interesting, too, Frank, is that I was thinking about this the other day, and this wasn't because I was going to talk to you or anything like that. I was just thinking about something Peter said a few weeks ago, and thinking about my own kind of progression and authors that and it's so interesting to me. There's this huge disconnect somehow because when you talk to other writers, the writers that they like and who influence them are not at all the people that are on some bestseller list somewhere, like at all. You
right,
know, they're the Harry Crews of the world and the Larry Browns and the
yeah,
Cormac McCarthy's, although he is on some list, but those guys are, I guess, what I would refer to, for lack of a better term, writers.
yeah,
Where in the writing community we all sit there and go, ooh, but then I go and look for them in my library app to see if they have any audiobooks, and there's not a thing. Like Larry Brown doesn't exist according to the
wow,
Riverside County libraries, and it's like, because
crazy,
the right, yeah, I mean, the writers I talk to, they love them. But if I look up John Sanford, and this is not knocking John Sanford, okay, but
sure,
John Sanford's a guy who you go to the airport and you're going to see a lot of John Sanford novels.
yeah,
Okay, not a knock at all. In fact, good for him. But it's he churns out a mystery every single year, has a couple different series, does very well with them. Good for him. But the point is that I go on there and there's 38 audiobooks I can listen to
yep.
of John Sanford. And Larry Brown, there's not even a book I can check out, let alone an
It
audiobook.
sucks because there's some good ones. I've got several of his on audio. They're
Okay,
definitely
yeah. Yeah. In fact, I
good.
just listened to Blood Meridian. Not that I haven't read it a bunch, but I just listened to Blood Meridian on audiobook for the first time. And that's a trip.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's actually better to listen to it than it is to read it. I think I didn't realize
I think so
that. So,
too. Yeah.
yeah, I've got that. That's awesome. That's an
Yeah, he
awesome.
does he does a real good job, whoever does the reading on it.
It's
But
really like reminiscent of Deadwood's what it reminds me of because the
mhm,
way he does the characters and everything. It's
yeah.
what it reminded me of. Yeah, it's a great book.
Yeah, but it's funny to me how a lot of the writers that we talk about in our little writing community are not at all people that sell a lot of books. It's kind of like,
They
it's
do over time, but
yeah.
they have I think, hate to put it this way, they have more respect. I guess people are more they respect them more than some of the other people, for whatever reason. I guess because there's more of a deepness to their writing or their
Uh-huh.
style. They kind of really dig a little deeper beneath the skin than what some other people do or some other authors.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that
So
might be it. And quite frankly, I don't know how some authors do it. Like I look at, well, Stephen King, I've never known how he does it, but dude churns out a 700-page book every year and a half. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea how he does
I
that.
agree.
I mean, you talked earlier about how, discipline plays a big part, and it does, without question. Being a writer, if you're undisciplined, you are screwed because there's a Philip Roth quote, which is, uh, a few of us wait for inspiration, the rest of us just get to work.
Yep.
And it's the concept of bringing your lunch pail kind of writing, which is just you just sit down for a few hours, whether it's 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever, 6 hours, whatever it might be, and you just knock out whatever you can that day, even if you're not feeling it. And that. I mean, you're a weightlifter too. That there's plenty of days you don't want to go to the gym.
I get up and do it. That's try to do
Exactly.
the thing when I get out of bed, and it makes the rest of the day go. That's what incorporates the rest of my day. I don't miss workouts.
Exactly. And it's the same thing with writing. It's like
Yeah.
it's easy. There's so many reasons why we can't write.
Yeah. Well, carry something with you can write on because you can always trying to put down some notes somewhere on something.
Yep.
Donald Ray Pollock always says you just got to show up with the chair. At least come and sit in that chair behind your desk, whether you write anything or not. At least sit in that chair and doodle. Because
Yep.
that's what you have to do. You got to sit in that chair and get something done.
Yep. Love it. Yep. No, it's true. I mean, and I read something by Christopher Nolan that I thought was interesting recently. The director, but he also writes most of his scripts. And he wrote, just because you're not sitting in a chair at a typewriter doesn't mean you're not writing.
That's
And
true. That's very true.
right, and I looked at it and I went, okay, yeah, I can see that because there's so many times when I'm out there and all of a sudden I'm reaching for my phone on notes to write something down, that I just thought of.
I do that a lot. I do that a lot. Yeah. I
Yeah,
either have my phone or I'll carry my journal with me. I've got a leather brown journal always carry it's full of notes. Yeah. All the time. Yep.
yeah,
There's no
absolutely,
excuse because you got to take that back and implement it to everything. Yeah.
exactly. So you've been on this book tour, right, for a few weeks now, and so tell me about in particular Oxford, Mississippi, because I haven't been there and I want to go.
You should definitely go. Yeah. I went to Oklahoma first. It's about a 15-hour drive from here and hit the college out there with Jared Kaufman. He was the professor that had me out. I had a really good time. It was kind of a rush trip. I wish I could have stayed a little bit longer, but easy drive. And then we drove from Oklahoma down to Oxford, Mississippi. I was down there for 4 days. Did a reading with it's called Thacker Mountain Radio. They
Okay.
usually have two or three musicians, and they try to put an author with them, and then they
Oh, cool.
the NPR stations that night, and then the next weekend it hits a bunch of different states to their NPR stations. So that was a really good event. And the guy who hosts you actually reads your book. He took backstage and talked to me before the show, and he's like, "Whoa!" He's like, "This book is windy." I said, "I never thought about that." I said, when I started off, I was writing because the setting there was a storm coming is that we had that came through on that same time period that I set the time period for the book. And as when we went back to do edits, it kind of felt like it wasn't nearly as important.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I got to spend the next 3 days basically hung out with Ace Atkins, got to go visit Larry Brown's place, got to meet his son, hang out with
That's
his son.
awesome.
Super good guy. Got to go out to the sea where Larry's fishing cabin, where he built it before he passed away, and the fishing hole and everything for a miracle of catfish. And then Shane took me back. There's a map that Larry drew in the front of the book. He said, "I'm gonna take you out and show you where this map comes from. It's out here on this road. This is the actual map, this road and everything." It's all took me out and showed me that, and then detoured me back to town. And then we went to Faulkner's place and visited it, and had some really good food.
What a
Got
trip.
to, like I said, hang out with the Ace a couple of days and got to shoot the shit. And because he and I had met in France, we did a panel there in Lyon back in 2013, I think it was. It was
Mhm.
me, him, and Craig Johnson, and seems like there was somebody else, but I don't remember who it was. I think there was a couple of French writers. Can't remember exactly who it was, but yeah, we got to meet. Ace had lost all of his luggage. He didn't get all of his luggage when he first got over there, and they get it to him till the day he was getting ready to leave because his wife was working. So he had to buy all new clothes.
Right, right.
He was joking around. He said, "I still have some really expensive French underwear from when I was over there." But yeah, I mean, Oxford's just it's so historical, and
Yeah.
it's kind of a literary community, really.
Yeah, I mean, I
Really
think
awesome.
I could be wrong here, but I think that it's one of the most or busiest cities in the country when it comes to bookstores per capita. So I think it has as
Oh,
many or more bookstores
four,
per capita than like anywhere in the country.
yeah, there's four bookstores on that entire square, so it's pretty awesome. The only one I didn't get to go to was the used bookstore. It was closed every time I got over there because I
Mm.
would get sidetracked with something else. A lot of good food to eat. I mean, it's just a nice area, super nice. Everything's in walking distance too. So yeah,
Yeah, I've heard it's a really cool college town. So
yeah, I would definitely say go whenever the college is out, so that you're not having to with
sure.
all that. You know, it's that's not too bad, but yeah, yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah,
And then came back. Um, I've done a couple different podcasts. Some are out, some aren't out yet. Did a book release reading at Carmichael's Books in Louisville, Kentucky. Then I did a release here in my hometown. Then the
very
one
cool.
podcast I went down to Evansville to do. I did the local news station in Louisville, Kentucky for their morning show. Did like a five
Mhm.
or 10 minute spot. And then we've got some more stuff on top of yours. Got some more stuff on down the road. I got stuff up in Bedford, Indiana. I'm going back to Evansville to do some stuff.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's cool.
Richmond, Kentucky. We're thinking about doing something down there. I mean, Ashley Irwin down there at uh, Apollo Pizza with Wes Brown, the writer of Hillbilly Hustle.
Hmm.
He owns a couple different parlors down there. So yeah, I've
Cool.
been there before. He always puts on a really good reading series. So yeah,
Very cool. Yeah. So talk to me then about one of the books that you put out last year, 2022, was with Norman Reedus.
yeah.
And for those people who aren't putting name to face, Norman Reedus, think of the guy with the crossbow in The Walking Dead,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean that's who you think of, that or Boondock Saints, right? So
yeah.
that
That's pretty much what I'm
right. I
thinking.
mean that's pretty much it.
And
So
Norman Reedus ride. He's got his ride series too, is where he travels around on his motorcycle to different
motorcycle, yeah. So first off, what's Ravaged about? But I mean, how did you come into contact with him? How did the whole thing come to be? And did you work collaboratively with him on that, or?
Yeah, basically his agent, he's got a book agent that reached out to mine. Agent texted me one night, said, "Hey, Norman Reese is interested in writing a book. Would you want to write it with him?" I'm like, "Sure." She's like, "Okay, I'll set up a meeting. You guys can talk." And set up a meeting. We talked, and he kind of pitched the idea of these three different characters that he had kind of sketched out. And I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Let's do it." You know, and he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." He's like going over scenarios. I was like, "Well, our people got to kind of talk and work out a deal before we can really do anything." But I kind of started on it immediately, share no forth while they're negotiating a contract. But yeah, he had three character sketches. I helped develop them. The kind of the main character is, of course, a motorcycle guy who
Uh-huh.
is based in Mormon, but he's also based on my cousin who served in Iraq because he's a helicopter mechanic. So I thought those two scenarios fit together. You know, a gearhead,
Sure,
but
sure.
also so I pulled a lot of things from my cousin serving over in Iraq, and I would shoot on Norman's ear just about every day, picking apart tattoos on his body, what they signify, where they come from, what type of motorcycle would this guy drive, what kind of
Hmm.
what are your recommendations, those kinds of things. And then
Yep.
the other guy was I named Jack, which is based off of part of it's based off of my uncle, and the other part's based off of a guy he met that was from a Fortune 500 company on one of his flights that had basically worked his way up to have this company, make all this money. And when he got to that point in his life, he wants for nothing, but all of his family members are basically dead. His wife's died of cancer. And he has nothing to show for it other than this money.
Uh-huh.
So created that character that way. And then we had a younger girl who's a train hopper that he just kind of wanted that idea. So I ended up kind of basing it off of my niece, who was kind of very similar persona, but the girl's a runaway and ends up hopping trains all the way across the United States. The a theory was that they would cross paths at some point, which they don't. I kind of left it open in case whoever wants to write another
Okay.
book can or
Gotcha.
cannot. And
Gotcha.
the biker, it's kind of like a road trip because Jack is stuck down in
Yeah, I
South
saw that.
America, and his company's like, where the hell are you at? They're searching for him, and he doesn't care. He's kind of like trying to find himself, you know. And it gets mixed up towards the end, getting taken hostage by like a major cartel leader because he knows that
Oh,
there's money. He's worth money, you know, to get him back to the
sure. Sure.
States.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And
It,
the other part is that uh, Norman's character, as he's traveling cross country, his father has died, which was Norman's original idea. And he comes across all these different things and learns things on the way, but he starts finding things out about his dad that he didn't know. I'm not going to ruin any spoilers or anything. And when he finally gets there to find out that his dad might not have died, he might have been murdered. So it was a house fire.
gotcha.
And then the
So
girl who runs away from home's a train hopper. They all kind of make their way out to the same area, but they just never cross paths.
I
But
saw that.
you know,
Yeah.
the girl who runs away from home, I had to research the different train lines because the train lines
Yep.
on this coast are different from that coast, and they don't run. You know, one does the east and west, and one does north and south, and they don't share tracks unless they get confirmation they can, but they usually don't. You know, there was all
Gotcha.
kinds of little things I got to research on. So,
Yeah.
but I would basically write about 25 pages, rough pages, send to him, and he would offer any notes if he wanted, or change this or change that, and that's what I would do. You know,
Right.
yeah,
So how was that process? And I'm not necessarily talking about Norman here. I just mean most of the time, well, almost all the time, unless you're a playwright or a screenwriter, the majority of the time we work pretty independently,
yeah, I
you
did.
know. So
Yeah, all I do is either text him or email. Yeah, that's
how
all
was
I would.
collaborating? I mean, how was
Just
that process?
simple. I mean, usually if I send him 25 pages, the next email I get like within 10 to 12 hours because he did read it, be like, oh, I fucking love it. Keep going. Because I told him, I said, I want to make sure we stay on the same page. I don't want to write something that this is not the idea that you have in mind because he had
Right.
actually already worked with somebody and they totally they screwed the pooch. They tried to turn it into Sons of Anarchy. He goes, I said, I don't know how they done that after what you're telling me. But he and I really hit it off because we had a lot of the same interests as far as music and books and things. It's kind of like, oh, dude, you got to write. You know, I didn't know. You know, we got to talk about Charles Bukowski and Tom Waits and
Sure.
just different things and culture things. And we just kind of hit it off. And he's a really down to earth guy. I mean, other than you know being The Walking Dead and a
Right.
gazillionaire, he's actually a really down to earth guy. You know, and so yeah. But yeah, I was pretty much I got free reign to keep it on track, and that's what I did. You know, I wrote the rough draft in 4 months, so
Okay.
cleaned it
Okay.
up, turned it in, and then started on the. I had a really good editor from uh, uh, what is it called? I can't remember the name of the publisher. I'm used to my publisher, Blackstone Publishing. Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
it was awesome. I mean, I was stuck in my head. I mean, every day I was carrying a note. I actually carried a couple different notebooks with me everywhere I went. You know, I was constantly jotting down notes and stuff so I could
Sure.
just keep it moving because it was during COVID. I
Uh-huh.
was actually working on another book and I just kind of scrapped it off to the side and stuck with this. It kind of got me back in the habit of writing fiction because I was working on a nonfiction book and
Mhm.
kind of lit the fire underneath me. Plus, I was waiting on edits for this book. When COVID hit, it kind of screwed everything up in the publishing industry. You know,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, COVID really kind of threw a wrench in the works for a good year for everybody, you know?
it didn't bother me because I don't mind. That's my wife's like, you know, you don't get any interactions or anything. I said, I don't care. I said, nobody's bothering me. I can write and do whatever I want.
Exactly.
I can go out and work out. Nobody's bothering me. I don't really care. It doesn't bother me.
By the way, what was your wife's reaction when you started writing? Because that would, it's one thing when you meet somebody, like for example, when I met my wife, I'd already been writing for years. So like in her head, I was, writer Brian. So, that, but when you got married, you weren't writing and it was all of a sudden something to pick up. So how was she with that?
Yeah, I always kept a journal, but not, yeah, I wasn't writing stories. I just always kept a journal about, because of training in martial arts, lifting weights, I was always writing down how my day went, different workouts, things I need to work on. If I was studying with a teacher or not, you know, if I was traveling, because I traveled off and on quite a bit, working with some different teachers. And my theory was I thought I kept I was like, I've got to try to go to school, get an English degree or get a literature
Sure.
degree. I was
Right.
like, you don't have to do that. And then, of course, when I discovered Larry Brown, I'm like, I guess you don't have to do that. So I just
Right.
taught myself how to write,
Yep.
and read more about Hunter S. Thompson. His whole thing was, he took his favorite novel and just basically typed it out a couple of times to get how you feel, how that rhythm and how everything
Sure.
works. And I started doing that by rereading a lot of my favorite books over and over again, and that kind of helped
Hmm.
me build that base.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
she was accepting of it. You
Okay.
know, that there's been times it's kind of like, you're not going to go here. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go there. You go to your families or go do that. I don't care. I'm not a high schooler anymore. I'm going to sit here and work on this. I'm writing a
Right.
story.
Right.
This is more, yeah, it is more important. Sorry. I mean,
Yeah. No,
time
it's,
waits
I
on
mean,
nobody. I'm
that
sorry, but
that's the thing about writing is that it takes time. It is one of those things. It takes time between the reading and the writing and the editing and rewriting. The whole process takes a lot of time, and so it is something where you do make that sacrifice a lot of the time. Where no, I
it's
can't.
like I mean, when you're on that dopamine high from writing, you want to keep it going. You
Yeah,
know,
no, it's true. It's true. Yeah. So
it's like a drug. I mean, I don't know how else to
yeah,
explain it.
absolutely, absolutely, it is. All right, so we're gonna end here, Frank. But first, before we do, I want to get back to the dirt. But first off, I want to give a little shout out because we talked about this earlier to the guys at KG Handcrafted. Pick those
Yeah,
knives up if you would, and and let's see those KG Handcrafted guys.
yeah.
Look at that. He's a knife maker, and just recently found out he's doing a whole set of knives on the characters from Blood Meridian. Uh, each one kind of themed after Glanton or the Judge or the Kid or whatever, which is going to be pretty sweet. So
Quality work. He does quality work.
quality work, excellent. All right, awesome. Thank you for that. So this is the new book, Back to the Dirt, just came out this past week, and it is a sprawling, a lot of, I want to call it a lot of fun, just because it is a lot of fun because there's a lot of violence. Sorry, I like reading about violence. But
I've
but
been told it's my least violent book, though. I have been told
yeah,
that.
yeah. But it's at the same time it's really it's got a lot of depth to it, and it's not just a John Wick book. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's by far my most balanced book. Um,
yeah,
I owe
yeah.
that to my Jackson Howard and Sean McDonald, my editors. I mean, they did a great job with the editing. I mean, they always do, but I think a lot of it had to do with in the middle of editing, my mother came down diagnosed with dementia, Alzheimer's disease. So we had to kind of like
Ah,
slow the editing process down there, kind of like, hey, no problem. We can push things out. And it gave me more time in between caring with her to think more about what their words were saying as far as, asking questions. And I could really do a deeper dive. Because a lot of times in post production, between the editing, getting things in shape, and then you do another round of edits, it's just really quick. And you don't really,
mhm.
it goes by so quick. And there's things that once you get the copy, it's kind of like, shit, I wish I would have done this or done that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
maybe because my problem is I have to read something two or three times to really absorb what they're actually saying. The first time is like, what the fuck is this about? What do you mean you don't understand what this is? And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, they don't get that because they're not from the Midwest.
Sure. Yeah,
Those kinds of things. I
yeah.
think it was there's a comparison I'm making there about how tall Shadrach is he's the height of the back wheels of a tractor tire. My editor's like, what the fuck does this mean? I'm kind of like, have you ever seen a tractor? So I'm like, I sent him a picture of a tractor and how big the tires are in the back compared to the front. I'm like, this. I said, it's about 4 foot, depending on the tractor.
Right.
Oh, okay, I got you. I'm like, I'm not being an asshole. I'm just showing you a picture so you understand what I'm talking about. I think there's
Right.
another comparison I make about Walker Hounds because of their coloring. They've got more of a white, brown, and black color to them. And I make a comparison. He's like, is there something wrong with this? Are they sick? I'm like, no, it's a color comparison, dude. And I send him a picture. This is what the dogs look like. I'm comparing the contrast of colors. Oh, okay. I'm like, you're not going to get it because you're not from here. I
Mhm.
understand that. So, like you need to get a ticket and fly to Louisville, Kentucky. I'll bring you to Indiana and we'll go hang out for the week and I'll show you everything that's in this book.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
but yeah, they were spot on. That's the cool thing about editors is you learn from them and they learn from you.
Yeah.
It's kind of the whole it's interesting,
Yeah, yeah, and the really important part about an editor is that you trust them,
Oh,
because
I definitely do trust my
yeah,
editors.
because if you don't trust the editor, in the back of your head, you're always going, really? Do I need to make this change? Why are you not getting it? But if you really trust the person, then it's, oh, okay, I'll try to make this more clear, or I'll, whatever it
Right.
might be, because you do trust their opinion. So
Yeah, you don't want to be second guessing your editor. That's not a good thing.
yeah, exactly, exactly. All right, man. So hang out with me for a couple minutes. This has been Starlite Pulpcast, episode 17. Back to the dirt. Frank Bill. Go pick it up if you can, and wherever books are sold these days, our virtual shelves. And you guys have a great time out there. And Starlight Pulp review with a story from Frank should be out in about a month. Thanks, guys.
And remember, when you read the Pulp Review and you read my book or any of the books or anything we've done, it's always good to leave us reviews somewhere. It helps
Absolutely.
spread the word. I never think to tell people that. I wish I had been doing it about 10 years ago. I never think about it.
Absolutely. No, it's
Reviews
true
help a
too,
lot.
because
It
giving
helps connect with
reviews.
like-minded people and like-minded readers, so it gets
Absolutely. It helps get the word out.
yes, yes, it
All
does.
right. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
In this top secret